My name is Kurt Rudolph. What I'm going to go through with you today is mobile app development with web frameworks. Um, a little bit of backstory. Basically, about 3 or 4 months ago, I was charged with the task of building a touch interface that was not necessarily going to be on a specific mobile platform or desktop operating system. So right away, what jumped out was web frameworks. Over the past few months, I've honed in on a combination of tools slash frameworks which are best suited for the task. What we will cover today is Ruby on Rails, jQuery Mobile, PhoneGap. We'll develop a quick demo app, basically a little blog application, and we will finish up by reviewing. So Ruby on Rails, well, it's not one thing. It is Ruby and it is Rails. Ruby being the higher level programming language. Why have we chosen Ruby? Well, it is object oriented. Everything in Ruby is an object. Easily extensible. Adding in Ruby gems is very, very straightforward. These gems being what Ruby refers to as its libraries. I'm sorry if I keep coughing. And it has a great open source community, and hence why it has so many Ruby gems. So why not Ruby? Well, basically performance. It's nice to work with. It's got a great community, but at the end of the day, it has a huge memory overhead, and its threading, it has issues with concurrency. Basically, the only interpreter which actually is concurrent right now is the JRuby interpreter, building on top of the Java virtual machine, and even that has some performance downsides when comparing it with Java or Python. So what is Rails? Rails is a web application framework. Basically, you're set up to get things rolling. The idea is any given developer who's familiar with the framework can come in and know exactly where your resources are, know exactly where configurations are. But why specifically Rails? Well, it is an extremely productive development environment. It includes everything you need to launch your application. It puts a wrapper around your database, meaning you don't have to mess with SQL queries for basic things. If you are doing something particularly complex in your query, you probably want to write it yourself, not have Rails configure it for you. But for the most part, it saves you a heck of a lot of time and makes your application portable to any one of the number of databases which Rails supports. Again, a great open source community. Convention over configuration. I find this pretty important because at the end of the day, you can change whatever you want in Rails, and it will work, provided you have set it up in a manner that it will work. Why not Rails? Well, performance. It's written in Ruby, and therefore inherits its performance. jQuery Mobile. It is a branch of jQuery. You can get that from the name. It's similar to a product called Venture Touch. Basically what it is a set of buttons, page transition, things very nice for mobile app. It's got a great open source, up and coming, but why not jQuery Mobile? It's fairly new. It still has some work, but they are being rapidly ironed out. Each new version coming faster than the last. They phone moment is PhoneGap. Basically, with PhoneGap, JavaScript, HTML application, native. This means all resources are cameras, storage. All of these are available via JavaScript, a standard PhoneGap JavaScript library. The PhoneGap software was recently acquired by the Apache Foundation. The company which originally developed it was acquired by Adobe and is now still supporting the app. Why not PhoneGap? Well, again, performance. It's not porting your application to actually be native. It is calling the same functions in which the web browser does and displaying them without the address bar. And another thing to keep in mind is the native app key. How accustomed are your users to the native iPhone interface? Things like this are something to consider because it is rendering JavaScript and HTML. These are what are taking care of page transitions, buttons, layouts. Everything is handled by HTML and JavaScript, not the native interface. Moving forward, let's look at our roadmap. Basically, we'll start with a Ruby on Rails app. We'll add in our jQuery and we'll port it over the PhoneGap. In a few minutes, we'll have a cross-platform mobile application. So let's go ahead and get started. Basically, beginning a Rails application is as simple as Rails new, and let's call it demo. And this is going to be running for a bit, but I'm running on my Core 2 Duo 1.4 gigahertz laptop, so not the speediest thing when you're doing a screen recording. But coming back to this, PhoneGap supports iOS, Android, Windows Phone, BlackBerry, WebOS, Symbian, and Beta. A cheap WebOS tablet to support your application, depending on what you're doing with this, that may be the best solution. And having this versatility is pretty nice. I wish this would go faster. There we go. Now everything in the system is configured. We have all the files we need. Currently running on the screen, but let's start a new one. So screen essentially being virtual tabs. Not that tabs aren't already virtual, but makes them virtual within the terminal itself. Let's call our screen demo. So now we're in our Rails app. Let's go ahead and make some basic configuration. We're going to be building on using the jQuery mobile Rails gem. And incorporation is as easy as specifying it in the gem file. We're also going to be using Camel, which is basically a more human-readable form of HTML. Click Bundle Install. Moving forward, so Haml being, this. You can pause the video if you'd really like, but basically it removes the need for open and close and uses a tab system similar to how Python does it. We're also going to be using SAS, not SCSS, the actual SASS original form of SAS, and CoffeeScript. We really don't get into any JavaScript, but CoffeeScript is just nice, and by default with Rails 3.1, CoffeeScript is employed. And again, basically more human readable JavaScript. What did we do here? jQuery Rails. No, we want jQuery mobile. Great. Now we have everything configured. Proceeding with a few more customizations, let's go ahead and make SASS SAS files by default. Rails is configured to use SCSS by default. I see why. I see why people use the SCSS. Incorporation into existing CSS files, existing CSS code is much more straightforward, but SASS is just much more straightforward for reading the code. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And if you're building an application from scratch, you might as well use SASS. Let's go ahead and look at our config application. Alright, so now let's go ahead and launch our server. The quick Rails server, we're up and running. By default, Rails uses port 3000. Let's go over to our web browser. From a previous test, but refreshing and we get the same thing. This is the default page generated by Rails. Basically, it exists in our public folder as the index.html. Let's just go ahead and get rid of that. We don't need it. Let's open a new screen window. So remove public index. Now, if we go back to our web browser, we get an error. So our Rails server doesn't know where to go now. It needs to send the root of the application somewhere. So let's generate a home. And let's give home an index. Alright, so now let's go into our configuration and check out our routes. And let's point our root to home index. Alright, let's check out our application now. And there we go. The default stub that Rails generated for us in the home index view. Coming back to our app, let's add in the jQuery mobile libraries now. Basically, you need to configure your style sheets existing in the assets folder. And we want this to be application-wide, so we will add that in the application CSS file. Basically, this is the first CSS file to be loaded, and will load all others upon their request. So when I generated the home controller, it generated a style sheet. Style sheets. It generated a home.css.sass, which is really, really nice that it just makes that for us. So adding in support for incorporating, not adding in support, require jQuery mobile. And also we need to add into our application JavaScript file. All right, so let's take a look at our app again. Do you want to refresh the page? You can already see the background has changed, the font has slightly changed. This is jQuery Mobile adding in its styling. This is one of the really nice features about jQuery Mobile, is it just takes care of this kind of stuff for you. Not much overhead in getting a nice application going. This isn't quite anything yet, but you'll see with a few additions what jQuery Mobile is capable of. So proceeding forward, I'm going to go ahead and convert our HTML, our application .html.erb to a HAML file. We also want this to parse our Ruby commands. -e parameter does so. Let's go ahead and get rid of the ERB file. And just to verify we didn't break anything. And we're good to go. Proceeding forward, we're going to go ahead and add in the default layout for jQuery Mobile. So if you look in the documentation, they have outlined the incorporation of the style sheets and JavaScript libraries. We take care of that with the incorporation of the gem and the addition of the required jQuery Mobile in our style sheets and CSS, or our JavaScript file. But basically what we're going to add in is this in the form of HAML. For time's sake, I'm just going to paste it. but essentially this is a direct conversion. And there we go. So let's take a look at how our applications change with very little code. All we said was we created a page, a div with a data role page, a div with a data role header, a div with the data role content, and a div with the data role footer. And right away, Rails jQuery mobile takes care of a lot of this stuff for us. You can see the page title, page footer. These are the labels that are the headers within those divs. And you can see our page content. Page content goes here, and the default stuff generated by Rails for our home controller is now being rendered here. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit prettier. So we're going to change our footer to be fixed. Essentially what this does is it pins our footer to the bottom of the page with a quick position fixed. Again, Rails being dry, do not repeat yourself. And our data role footer and our data position fixed. And we're pinned to the bottom. Coming back, let's add in a home button to the header. So Rails having these nice link to functions, and jQuery mobile having its nice data role, data icon. It's basically its set of data attributes for the various divs and links. Coming back to our app, well, looks like we broke it. This is actually because we don't have a route for home. We've pointed our route to our home, but we actually need a route for that controller. So let's take a look at big routes, and let's go ahead and add in match. I have it written down. Match home to home index. Great. Let's see how it looks. Outstanding. We have this nice home button here that now when we click it, takes us to our home page. Now, we're already at our home, so you didn't see much of a change, but you get the idea. Let's go ahead and move forward. Basically, now we're going to add in some blog functionality. Essentially, what I'm going to execute is Rails generates scaffold blog posts. So this is going to create a database table called blog post and give it columns title, content, and user with the format of string, text, and string. This is one of the very nice aspects of Rails is something simple like this doesn't require a bunch of hard coding. It's it's a simple script that just configures it for you because this is something that's standard. Uh, Standard should have standard scripts to generate these things, and we're off and running. Um, go ahead and migrate this. This adds the configuration to our app, the configuration of the database, and the actual rake db migrate actually creates the database tables within the actually creates the tables within the database itself. So whatever database Rails is configured to use, in this case SQLite, um, it actually creates them. Should we configure this with MySQL or Oracle DB? A simple rake db migrate, and we're off and running with support for such. So taking a look at our application now, well, this is still just a home page, but you can see we can go to blog posts, and right away we have our blog post configured, and our home button takes us to the home of the application. Great. Moving forward, let's do a bit more configuration. Again, configuring the index of home to be a HAML file. And then just removing the ERB. And now let's add in buttons on our home to create a new post and view posts. So by default, Rails has generated the views for us already to view posts and create new posts. So we're just linking to them at this point. So going into our app, the views, our home, and getting rid of all of that nonsense. And here we go. So link to the name and which appears of the link, new blog post URL, kind of a rule of thumb for jQuery mobile applications. You want to use the full URL, a bit more data transferred, but at the end of the day, it makes the transitions and external links a little bit less buggy. And then adding in the data role button attribute to give it the nice stylings that jQuery has. And then again, view posts. So to view the post, we're just going to look at the index of the blog posts model, and we're off. Coming back to our application, we are at the home page, and we can do quick refresh, and there we go. New post, view post. I'm not sure why a touch application incorporates hover, but it's kind of nice. I mean, these applications work perfectly fine with a mouse. So let's do a new post. And you can see right away, Rails has taken our default generated Rails stub for creating a new entry in the blog post table and encapsulated it in the nice jQuery mobile styling. So let's call it wow. And let's go ahead and create one more. Great. Now we're all set. Let's take a look at the posts. Well, not particularly appealing looking, but a lot of functionality here. Edit, destroy, and the new blog post button here. Let's go ahead and make that a little bit prettier now. Again, converting this over to a HAML file. I haven't found how to just have Rails generate HAML files by default, but a quick couple manual commands and we're good to go. Blog post, index. So we have our nice HAML file here, but I'm just going to go ahead and replace all of this with something I've written previously. Basically, link to a new blog post, a little header, and for each post, it creates a collapsible div. What this is buttons. List views. Basically, jQuery Mobile has a number of different list views you can use. We are specifically using the collapsible. Collapsible. Oh, I can't seem to find it right now. Nested list. I mean, it's very nice that they have all of this functionality already built for you. Collapsible. Maybe it was in the list. I can't remember off the top of my head what function I was using. It's in here somewhere though, and you'll see when I run the app. But basically, within this collapsible list, it gives it a title of blog post title. Within the collapsible, it gives the content of the blog post, the user who posted the post, and it gives you a link to edit and destroy, and formats it real nice with jQuery mobile. Coming back to our application, a quick refresh, and there we go. Our two blog posts that we created earlier. Wow, jQuery mobile and the Hello World. Hello World, a quick click on it, and we have everything drop down. Our edit and destroy button is available to us, and we can collapse it right back up. The other functions in the very same way. You can set them so you click one and the other will pop up, but you just got to dive into jQuery mobile and see what they have available. I mean, this is a full-featured blog application. It's integrating with the database. It looks pretty decent, and it took us 10, 15 minutes. I mean, destroying it, transitions, it does the works, and it's great. So the only real missing feature is kind of that, the native app feel. I, for one, don't like going onto my mobile device and seeing an address bar. In the same way we were looking at it from our desktop browser, we can look at the app from the iOS. I mean, this looks good. One thing we have missing here, actually, you didn't notice it was appearing rather small. This is due to the lack of a meta tag. So basically just saying meta import equals. And coming back to the iOS device, we can see it's rendered rather nicely. We can go create a new post. And there we go. We have our posts, easily collapsible, easily edited, easily destroyed, all with very little code. But at the end of the day, we're still running this out of a web browser. Basically, what I have created for the iOS device is I don't know where my code went. Basically what I have created here, and I will have the code posted on GitHub, is essentially a viewer without the web browser. So this is the standard code for the PhoneGap application. Essentially, PhoneGap sets all this up for you with the plugin for Xcode, for Eclipse, developing for Android and Visual Studio and Windows Mobile. But essentially what I have done is said onload access our application. So let's actually go to localhost, and let's go ahead and whitelist. This may not actually work though. I've had issues with whitelisting localhost. Don't ask me why, but let's see if this works. Oh, great. It did work. But as you can see, this is a local application. The camera, local storage, any other local resources are exposed to JavaScript, which is served to this device, and it is being hosted from our Rails server. Every one of these requests is coming in and being served to it, and we are able to dynamically generate our application. I mean, it's a pretty nice setup here. You can do a lot of things with this with not a lot of time and not a lot of code. And it's pretty easily maintainable and very, very scalable. Again, Rails has some performance issues, but at the end of the day, how much is your developer time worth versus the cost of forking a new process on a cluster of servers? I mean, yes, it does not handle threading very well, but to launch another Rails server, it's not that costly at this point in time. And if you're developing a custom application that's going to be used by, say, a company or a family get-together, anything of this nature, Ruby on Rails just makes sense. And then even for things such as Groupon or Twitter, GitHub, I mean, all of these things are developed with Ruby on Rails. And given that they have certain performance tweaks to make them run more optimally for their purpose, at the end of the day, they were developed with Ruby on Rails. It is a scalable platform, and in combination with things such as jQuery Mobile and PhoneGap, you're able to develop some pretty interesting things with not a lot of time, not a lot of code, and employing a lot of functionality. So, again, reviewing why Ruby, object-oriented. It's a nice programming language to use. Why Rails? Well, we just went through why Rails. It configures the defaults for you. It saves you a lot of time, and it encapsulates the database for you. So any kind of standard query you need to do, it takes care of that for you. jQuery Mobile, it's just a really great up-and-coming framework, and it could use your support. And PhoneGap, lastly, well, it exposes the native resources of the phone to your application, to your JavaScript of your application. Thank you very much.